Picture this. You're wearing an American uniform. You're risking your life to fight for freedom. Then you learn something that hits harder than enemy fire. Back home, some people still see you as second class. In Europe, many Black American soldiers tasted something they had never truly had in the United States, being treated like an equal. They could sit in cafes, walk into pubs, dance, and be judged by their actions instead of their skin. After that, why would anyone rush back to Jim Crow America? For many Black GIs, Britain felt like a different planet compared to the segregated America they left behind. European civilians often welcomed Black soldiers into public spaces without the same racial barriers and open hatred common in the United States. Interracial relationships were possible in Europe in ways that could be dangerous or even illegal back home. Black soldiers also found emotional freedom in European jazz clubs and social scenes, where music and community cut through the usual lines. Then came the hardest part: returning to segregation after tasting freedom. That mental shock made Europe feel even more appealing. Even though the US military still enforced segregation during World War II, many Black soldiers got their first taste of normal life on European soil. In Britain, you weren't just a Black soldier, you were an American serviceman. Black GIs kept saying the same thing about the way locals treated them. They treated us royally. Back home, Jim Crow meant separate facilities and limited rights. But in Britain, civilians welcomed you into their pubs, dances, and even their homes without acting like you didn't belong. James Waddell, an aviation engineer, said the British often saw you as an equal in the shared fight for freedom. That contrast hit hard. For the first time, you weren't blocked by color bars in normal social life. Your work as a soldier mattered, and it was acknowledged without someone adding, "for a Black man," at the end. Many men felt real dignity because Britain had only about 8,000 to 10,000 Black residents at the time, so locals often had fewer fixed ideas about race. Being treated like regular soldiers made a lot of Black GIs dread going back to America's prejudice system after the war. And that's where the bitter paradox grew. You were fighting abroad for freedom and democracy while being denied basic rights at home. In Europe, that contradiction became impossible to ignore. You defended liberty while being refused it. You heard anti-fascist talk everywhere, and it made the hypocrisy stand out even more. For many soldiers, this was an awakening. You saw more mixed societies that challenged the old lie that Black people were inferior. You also met European leftist and anti-colonial movements that gave you new ways to understand civil rights and power. Those connections, plus your experience in a segregated army, pushed many men toward organizing, whether they returned home or stayed abroad. In Britain, local pubs like the Old Hob Inn became safe places for Black soldiers. That was a huge contrast to what the US military tried to enforce. Many Black servicemen told their stories in the African American press, connecting what they experienced in Europe directly to demands for federal civil rights reforms. A personal discovery started turning into political energy for change back home. British hospitality reached across class lines, with no organized segregation from locals. Even during rationing and war hardship, many Britons welcomed Black GIs as honored guests fighting Nazis. The acceptance wasn't based on color, it was based on personal worth. The contrast with the American system was sharp. American commanders tried to impose colored nights at pubs and set up separate facilities, but British landlords often refused to play along. A 1943 survey showed Black soldiers held more favorable views of the English than white American soldiers did, because of how they were treated. One Black soldier said he don't know he's colored until he looks in the mirror in Britain. Instead of America's strict racial ladder, Britain offered something rare: being judged by your character, not your skin. In British pubs, you didn't always have to look over your shoulder. Locals sometimes defended your right to be served. When white American military police tried to enforce segregation, some British landlords pushed back by posting "Black troops only" signs in defiance. Many soldiers said their color felt irrelevant until they checked a mirror. One soldier described the difference between British acceptance and white American attitudes as a starry sky upon a cloudy night. In post-war Germany, something surprising happened too. Nazi propaganda had painted black soldiers as threats and barbaric. But after the war, many real interactions between African-American GIs and Germans didn't match that fear. Germans often preferred your company over white American soldiers. Your friendliness and your generosity with rations and care packages helped break old stereotypes fast. Some Germans compared your life to theirs, saying they understood what it felt like to be treated as second-class citizens. An unexpected bond formed. In post-war Germany, you could often access restaurants, hotels, and theaters without the kinds of restrictions that waited for you back in the US. Some prejudice still existed, but many black GIs said it was nothing like the system back home, where, in some cases, even German POWs were treated better than black veterans who had fought for democracy. Then there was love. Back home, Jim Crow and violence enforced rigid color lines. But in Britain, many black GIs found fewer barriers in their social and romantic lives. You could talk to local women, dance with them, and date without the same fear of violent backlash. When white American MPs tried pushing American-style segregation, British civilians often took the black soldiers' side. That fight over who could sit where didn't stay quiet. One of the clearest examples was Bamber Bridge in June 1943. White MPs tried to arrest black soldiers drinking at Ye Olde Hob Inn. The situation exploded because local British places intentionally defied American segregation. Some pubs even posted whites-only signs, meant ironically welcoming black GIs while excluding white American soldiers. On June 24, 1943, the clash turned deadly. White military police entered Ye Olde Hob Inn to arrest black soldiers from the 1511th Quartermaster Truck Regiment who were simply having drinks with locals. Private William Crossland was shot in the back by MPs. Then a 5-hour firefight broke out as black soldiers armed themselves in response. More than 400 rounds were fired. In the end, 32 African-American soldiers were courts-martialed and sentenced up to 15 years, while no white MPs were charged for Crossland's killing. Bamber Bridge residents had welcomed black troops, even putting up black troops-only signs when commanders attempted to impose segregation. That kind of community support showed why Europe felt like dignity and why home felt like a trap. And the discrimination wasn't only social. It could reach into the most personal things, like blood. During World War II, the Red Cross and military labeled black blood separately from white blood, refusing to allow black donations to save white soldiers. Officials claimed it was about white soldiers' prejudices, not medical science, because blood type, not race, determines compatibility. After 1942, they accepted black blood, but still marked it by race. It was Jim Crow logic pushed into the most intimate part of service. For many black GIs, Europe felt like escape from that kind of system, places where your blood and your humanity weren't supposed to be ruled by a color line. This dehumanization echoed the same logic used in Plessy Ferguson, where segregation was defended by saying separate but equal didn't imply inferiority. Away from the rules and insults, many black soldiers found refuge in Europe's music scene. European jazz clubs and pubs could feel like another world. In Brussels, Paris, and near bases in Germany, black GIs found places where military segregation loosened its grip. Venues like La Rose Noire in Brussels became meeting points where cultural barriers softened through music. The Blue Note, L'Archiduc, and clubs in Saint-Germain-des-Prés became havens where black servicemen felt freedoms often denied back home. You could find jazz all over Europe, from Paris's Hot Club to hidden clubs that survived even in Nazi-occupied territory. Black musicians like Alberta Hunter's Rhythm Rascals could perform for integrated audiences at USO shows, even playing for top leaders like Eisenhower. The story also reached back to the Harlem Hellfighters in World War I, whose performances helped spark Europe's jazz revolution. And the clubs weren't only about entertainment. They could be places of resistance. Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli formed the Hot Club Quintet in 1934, shaping a European jazz sound that welcomed black musicians. Hot clubs served as resistance meeting points during occupation, with members risking deportation. For black soldiers, these spaces showed a different possible world, one where your talent, not your skin, decided whether you were welcome. Letters home reveal how deeply Europe changed people. Many letters didn't openly discuss race. Instead, they described normal life, work, friendships, unit routines, and relationships. But the calm tone itself could be telling. Black servicemen, including members of the groundbreaking 6888th Battalion, encountered societies where their skills were valued. These soldiers were part of the Double V campaign, victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. Under the motto, "No male, low morale," the 6888th women processed millions of letters connecting soldiers with home while experiencing their own transformative encounters abroad. As black soldiers built real ties with European civilians, a new social reality formed. You could walk into cafes, dance halls, and churches without facing the barriers that shaped American public life. In Britain, France, and parts of Germany, people welcomed you into their communities. You could date, court, and even marry local women, relationships that gave emotional support during military life. These connections could also bring practical benefits. Some relationships led to job leads, housing help, and paths to residency. Living normal daily life, being respected and treated as fully human, made returning to Jim Crow America feel like stepping backward instead of going home. Then came the psychological hit of returning. After experiencing relative equality in Europe, many black soldiers faced a painful shock when they went back to America's rigid segregation. You fought for democracy abroad and got denied those same freedoms at home. Some black veterans saw German POWs enter white-only spaces that were still closed to them, even in uniform. That kind of message can damage your sense of self. Many black soldiers had built pride and leadership through positive interactions with Europeans who did not enforce racial hierarchies. But military doctors and officials often failed to recognize how racism shaped stress and trauma for black soldiers. Returning home erased so many gains, forcing people back into subordinate roles. That whiplash between respect abroad and humiliation at home helps explain why many preferred Europe. There was another explosive subject too: European women and black GIs. In Britain, some white women socialized with black soldiers despite criticism for walking out with colored troops. White American soldiers reacted with rage, sometimes shouting ugly insults like "big black buck" when they saw these couples. In America, about 30 states banned interracial marriage at the time, but in Europe, these relationships could grow, despite unofficial pressure. Authorities noticed. Reports spoke of around 2,000 brown babies in Britain and 5,000 in Germany. Women faced moral condemnation, and many children ended up in orphanages. The army also fought these relationships. A so-called gentleman's agreement restricted marriage permissions and excluded black GI wives from bride schemes. Still, the relationships continued, and for many soldiers, they proved that life without America's rigid racial boundaries could exist. That contrast didn't just change feelings, it changed politics. Being welcomed in Europe showed black soldiers that racism was not natural. It was a choice people made. At the same time, you couldn't ignore the hypocrisy. You were fighting Nazi tyranny while your own commanders enforced Jim Crow rules. Incidents like Bamber Bridge made the injustice crystal clear. After tasting freedom from constant discrimination, returning to America's segregated society became unthinkable for many. The war didn't just end in 1945. For many black veterans, it opened a new battle, one about dignity, rights, and real freedom. And that's where the next chapter starts. You ended the war with proof in your bones that life could be different. Then the transport ships turned around. The uniforms came home. And for many black veterans, America answered with a cold message. Welcome back. Now get back in your place. The first shock wasn't a law book. It was a sidewalk, a train station, a bus stop. In Europe, your uniform could open doors. Back home, it could make you a target. Some veterans stepped off a train and got called names before they even saw family. Some learned the hard way that medals don't stop a fist, a badge, or a mob. This is the part people skip when they talk about the greatest generation. Black soldiers didn't just fight Germany and Japan. Many came home and faced a third enemy, Jim Crow, with fresh anger in their chest and fresh discipline in their spine. Because now, you weren't guessing anymore. You knew the rules were man-made. You had watched whole towns overseas treat you with basic respect. So when a clerk back home talked down to you, it didn't feel normal. It felt like a lie you were done living inside. Then came the next trap. Benefits that looked equal on paper, but didn't work equal in real life. America talked about rewarding veterans, and the GI Bill was supposed to be a bridge into the middle class. But in many places, that bridge had guards at both ends. Colleges could run out of space. Banks could deny the loan. Neighborhoods could have rules. It wasn't always a sign that said no. It was a closed door with a smile. A lot of black veterans wanted to buy a house. That was the dream. A safe street, a yard, something solid after years of chaos. But many were pushed away by lenders, blocked by local rules, or trapped in areas where homes didn't rise in value. If you can't get the loan, you can't buy the house. If you can't buy the house, you can't build wealth. And if you can't build wealth, your kids start behind too. Education was the same story. Many veterans wanted to go to college, but in large parts of the country, the doors were limited. Some schools simply wouldn't take black students. Others made it almost impossible. Many veterans ended up squeezed into overcrowded black colleges or forced to give up the dream and go straight back to low-paying work. Now add one more hit: voting. Some black veterans tried to vote for the first time and found new tricks waiting: tests, threats, job pressure, and violence. You'd fought for democracy overseas, and at home you had to risk your life just to mark a ballot. That wasn't just unfair, it was humiliating, and humiliation is fuel. So what did many veterans do with that fuel? They organized. Not always loudly, not always with speeches. Sometimes it started with a small group meeting in a church basement. Sometimes it was a veteran walking neighbors to register together so nobody stood alone. Sometimes it was writing letters to newspapers, telling the truth in plain words. The war trained people to plan, to lead, to stay calm under stress. Those skills didn't disappear when the fighting ended. They just changed targets. And while many veterans returned home, others looked at the same crossroads and made a different choice. Don't go back. Or at least, don't go back right now. Staying in Europe after the war was not a simple vacation. It meant hard decisions. Money, work, papers, language, family back home. And the biggest question of all, where do you belong when your country won't fully claim you? Some black veterans stayed because they found work on bases, in ports, in clubs, or in rebuilding cities that needed every strong hand. Some stayed because they fell in love and built families. Some stayed because for the first time, their daily life didn't feel like a fight. Not perfect, not free of prejudice, but less like a cage. Still, staying had its own costs. Being far from home can feel like peace at first. Then it can start to feel like loneliness. Holidays hit different when your mother is across an ocean. A funeral back home can happen without you there. And sometimes, even in Europe, people could treat you like a curiosity instead of a neighbor. And then there was pressure from the American side. Even after the war, the US military carried its habits with it. Rules, control, suspicion. If you stayed near bases, you could still run into the old mindset. And as the Cold War heated up, the world got tense in a new way. Governments watched people. Rumors spread fast. Being outspoken could make you dangerous in someone's file, even if you were just asking for basic rights. But here's the twist. The Cold War also gave black veterans a new kind of leverage. America wanted to look like the leader of freedom to the world. The Soviets loved pointing at US racism and saying, "See, they don't believe in equality." That made US leaders nervous, not because they suddenly grew hearts overnight, but because racism was becoming a global embarrassment. You could feel that pressure building in the years right after the war. The question wasn't only, is segregation wrong? The question became, can America afford to keep doing this while the whole world is watching? Inside the military, that pressure finally cracked something open. In 1948, the US government ordered the armed forces to move toward ending segregation. That didn't magically fix everything overnight, but it was a huge shift. It meant the country could no longer pretend segregation was normal while asking people to die for the flag. And from Europe, some veterans could see America more clearly. You could compare systems. You could see what was policy and what was habit. You could talk to people from other countries who didn't accept America's excuses. You could meet students, workers, activists, and former soldiers from places fighting unfair systems too. Because Europe after World War II wasn't just rebuilding cities, it was questioning old empires. Across Africa and Asia, people were pushing for independence. The word freedom was suddenly everywhere, and people were asking, freedom for who? Black veterans weren't blind to that question. Many realized their struggle back home connected to bigger fights around the world. Because once you've lived without the cage, you don't forget the cage. You don't adjust back into it easily. The war didn't just end in 1945. For many black veterans, the next battle started the moment they came home, or the moment they decided not to.